So today we're here talking about what's new in manageability in Microsoft SQL Server Denali. So in case you don't know what we mean by manageability, that's kind of the interface that you see, how you interact with the actual SQL Server engine itself. So my name is Denny Cherry. Is this the wrong button? There we go. So a little bit about me real fast, and we'll actually get into the material you actually came here and actually give a crap about. I am either the author or co-author of 4 books now. The most recent one being Securing SQL Server, which is that pretty blue book there on the side, conveniently available for purchase downstairs in the bookstore. I've the author of about 6 or so SQL Server Mag articles. I've done several dozen other articles on various websites on the net. Been a Microsoft MVP since October of 2008. Microsoft Certified Master as of earlier this year. Recently launched SQL Excursions, which is a training company doing training. First event's going to be in Napa, California. I have stickers if anybody's interested. And after all that, I do actually have a day job where I am a senior database administrator for a company called Phreesia based out of New York. And in the 2 hours left in the day, I actually do consulting on the side. If you are a Twitter user, please tweet this phrase. I saw at Mr. Denny at MCM's at TechEd, and I've got little cards. And Microsoft Learning is actually doing a giveaway downstairs. You send the tweet, you turn in the card, they'll put you in a drawing for something. I have no idea what they're actually giving away. But I've been told it's really cool. That's about all they'll tell me. So for the next 72 minutes and 53 seconds, this is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to look at some enhancements that have been made by the product team in Management Studio. We're going to look at a new system in SQL Server called Distributed Replay. We're going to talk about something called contained databases, which is something that a lot of people have been wanting for quite a while and have finally been introduced into the product. We're going to look at sequences, which if Erland was here, he would tell you just how awesome they really are. The sequences are kind of a replacement for identity values that work a lot better and are going to perform a lot better for you. We're going to look at some the options available with the user-defined server roles, and then we're going to talk about data tier applications and a little bit of the changes that have been made. Just so you know, I am not a Microsoft employee, just to make that clear. So I'm not here on marketing message, although Microsoft has looked at my deck and made sure that everything's happy. So Management Studio. We all love Management Studio, right? Anybody miss Query Analyzer and Enterprise Manager? Really, nobody? Come on, Query Analyzer was awesome. It took like 2 seconds to start, and it would do whatever you needed. So Management Studio has been rewritten. It's now based on WPF in .NET, so it's still based on the .NET framework and .NET and Visual Studio. But because it's based on the newer technology, they basically rewrote a whole lot of it from scratch. So we've got a much faster load time than you would see in SQL Server 2005, 2008, where I don't know if anybody noticed, but Management Studio was a little sluggish when it would open. So they fixed a lot of that, and it's a lot faster to open now. I've got much better multi-monitor support now. You can drag windows. You can drag a query window now and just drop it into another monitor if you've got 2 or 3 monitors at the office or at home. It makes it a lot easier. I didn't realize just how much I wanted the multi-monitor support until I actually started using it. Unfortunately, I can't demo that because I have 1 monitor. It just happens to be 4 really big monitors showing the same thing. Microsoft's done a lot of work enhancing the keyboard shortcut support. There's a lot of discussion about how they were doing this over the last 6 months or so. And I think they've come up with a decent way of doing this to make life easier and more customizable in the long run for you. Oh, by the way, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to ask them. There's apparently microphones all over the room, so I can actually hear you. So does anybody use the debugger in Management Studio? Few? Okay, cool. It's usually about right. There's usually not a whole lot of people that use it. So they've done a lot of enhancements with the debugger to make it more user-friendly and to make it work better with the way people actually want to work with it, as opposed to the way the guys that came up with it expected it to work. So here's some of the enhancements that they've included in the product. The first one is the is-true condition breakpoint is going to accept all your Boolean expressions as input parameters now, whereas it didn't before. So that should make using the debugger a little easier, a little more flexible for you. You've got a lot, watch window support now, which we didn't really have before very much in the debugger, so it should make it easier to see variables and to get those values in and out without having to do print statements or select values out randomly in the middle of your .NET or your SQL code. You'll get data tips when you're debugging, so it'll throw out tool tips up to tell you where things could be better and stuff like that. And you can now debug back to Yukon, which is SQL Server 2005. SP2 and up is now supported with the debugging. Yeah.
Do you have to still be a sysadmin to debug?
The question is, do you have to still be a sysadmin to debug? And I don't actually know the answer to that. I'm sysadmin on every server I look at. So I want to say yes, because it's got to do a lot of low-level stuff, but I'm not positive about that. Shoot me an email. Yeah, so shoot me an email. I can check on that, and if you still do, I can let them know that they should try and work on changing that. One of the big new features in Management Studio is snippets. Hey, Chuck, nice of you to show up late. So snippets are quick, easy ways for people who are writing T-SQL and creating objects in T-SQL to get new code into the query window without having to know the exact syntax for everything. So there's two ways you can get into it. The first one is shown on the screen here, and even though it's a little hard to read. Just click on Edit, IntelliSense, and Insert Snippet. Or you can use the hotkey, which is one of those lovely two hotkey combinations. You do Control K and then Control X. And it'll pop up a snippets little menu so you can see what's going on there. And conveniently, I have a short demo. Oh, I don't have Management Studio open. Let me switch machines here. So the demos I'm doing today are all based on CTP1. That's the publicly available CTP that you can download if you haven't already downloaded it. Sorry, one of the things I did before my laptop crashed was open Management Studio on this machine, so you guys wouldn't have to sit here and watch the damn thing open. So I wouldn't have to sit here and muddle my way through killing some time. Come on. Don't you love it when technology cooperates with you? Machines blow up right before presentations. Well, this is a VM with like a gig of RAM and one processor. So, and I've got 6 VMs running right now and 4 processors. So don't gauge my VM's performance on how it actually functions. Smarty. I'm going to throw something at you before this presentation's over, Stuart. I can feel it in my bones. Yeah, my VMs are horribly slow. I need to give them more RAM. I bought more RAM just for this conference, and I just haven't reconfigured all my VMs yet. There we go. There we go. So we get insert snippet. We get a nice little drop-down window here that pops up. Unfortunately, zoom it doesn't work in a VM, so I can't even zoom, which is kind of annoying. But I can tell it, I want to do a function. And what kind of function do I want to create? And so we'll do multi-value statement function. So there we go. So there's all the code that we would need to create a function. You basically just fill in the blanks real fast, your function name, your various parameters, how you're going to return, and then you throw your code in there. Nice and easy. So very good for junior level people, more junior level people that don't necessarily have all the T-SQL memorized, or people that just don't write T-SQL on a regular basis. Even if you're a very senior level DBA, you may not be creating stored procs and functions on a regular basis. So this could help you go, okay, well, I need to do a new stored proc to do something. All right, cool. Bring on the snippet. There's all the framework you need to actually create a stored proc and get everything up and running. So unfortunately, it also makes a very quick and easy demo. So does anybody use Activity Monitor in Management Studio? Lots of people? Cool. So there's been some improvements to Activity Monitor. Unfortunately, I can't demo them. They've been announced, so I can actually talk about them, but they're not in CTP1. So if you don't know what Activity Monitor is, it gives you a quick overview of the instance. Basically, click on Activity Monitor, and it'll show you top running processes, a bunch of graphs about it. One of the big complaints with Activity Monitor was you couldn't make the columns bigger. Has anybody tried doing that and not had it work? That is going to be fixed. It is not in this build. It is supposed to, as I'm told, be in the next public release that's going to come out. So unfortunately, I can't show it. I couldn't even get them to give me a screenshot that I could show because that would be better than nothing. Yeah, that is like the biggest fix that they're putting in here. So one of the really big things that I'm spending a lot of time on over the product group is this thing called distributed replay. In Profiler, good old SQL Profiler, you can take a trace, and you can then take that trace to your development server and replay that trace against the dev database and see what's going on. You can see how things are running, and you see how commands run. But running multiple threads of that is kind of difficult. You've got to come up with some really hacks to do that sometimes. So they've come up with this distributed replay process, which allows you to spread the workload out of that trace against multiple servers as you push it back to a single database. So you get one database server, you get a bunch of replay servers, and then you get this control box at the bottom. The controller takes the workload, splits it up, sends it to this middle tier of servers, to the actual replay clients, as they're called. And then those replay clients then coordinate basically a mass attack against this one database server. So you can really do stress workload testing, and you can do kind of real-life scenario workload testing against your dev or your test system. So this runs in two different modes. One is called synchronization mode. One is stress mode. Synchronization mode kind of runs as your traditional workload would run in your environment. If there's wait times between commands in your trace file, those are going to be really obeyed very specifically in synchronization mode. Stress mode is just going to try to beat the ever-loving snot out of your SQL Server and just push it to as hard as it possibly can, running real-life T-SQL against it based on what's in your workload. So this is kind of the environment that you're going to set up when you're doing a distributed replay. I know this really well because I've been spending the last 6 weeks trying to get this demo working, and I got it working last night, so we'll see if it still works this morning. In a couple more slides. So you got your target server. So that's going to be the SQL Server instance over here on the right-hand side of your screen. The next one in, those are the replay clients. This is going to be a cluster of machines. I can believe you can put up to 16 machines in this cluster. Each replay client can run up to 255 threads against the SQL Server. So it's a real multi-threading app that you can run a ton of threads, do some real good, real-life workload simulations against a dev server. You wouldn't ever obviously want to run this against a production server. You've got a replay controller. So this is just a machine that tells everything else what to do. And then you've got an administration tool that you're going to probably want to run on your workstation, or you can just RDP into the replay controller, which is what I'll be doing for my demo. Now, you don't need to have a separate machine for the replay controller. You can run the replay controller can be one of these machines that's a replay client as well. It won't give it any other priority or any higher priority. It's just, there's just two services that run that sends it to each other. So there's two ways you can get data into the distributed replay server or process into this thing. One is to capture the data with Profiler, and the other is to use a server-side trace to grab the data. In either case, you need a trace file. You can't log to a trace table and grab from there. If you've got your data in a trace table, just open that table up in Profiler, file, save as, trace file. It'll dump the table into a trace file, and then you can feed that into the distributed replay process. So when you're doing distributed replay, there are two processes that you're going to go through. There's pre-process, and then there's the actual replay process itself. So the pre-process step is going to take the trace file that you give it, and it's going to create what's called an intermediate file, which is going to be stored on the replay controller. One catch that I found when getting all this set up is when you give it the trace file, and you're just going to give it a path. This is all done through the command line. You're giving it a path to a file on the local replay server, not on the administration workstation. So you need to take that trace file and get it up to the replay controller, and then you can run distributed replay from your workstation. So once pre-processing is done, and it's relatively quick, then you can do the event replay. At that point, it's going to take that intermediate file that it's created, It's going to parse that up based on however many clients are currently connected to it, and it's going to farm that workload out to them. Once those replay clients get all their data, then they're going to start replaying against the server to make sure that everything is getting pushed to the server in the appropriate order so that consistency is maintained between threads and whatnot. Sorry, I don't have my notes on the screen, so I actually have to look at my printout. So once the process has been going on, once it started running, there's a flag you can give the distributed replay client, which will actually log all the output to a file in your local system. So if you've got output that you want to be able to see within, that as part of the transactions that are running, you can capture those into this trace file at the bottom there. Yeah.
The replay clients, do they need to be on the robust side, minimal side, VM side?
As far as I can tell, fairly minimal requirements. I haven't seen any actual system requirements from Microsoft. I mean, I'm running 1 core, 1 gig of RAM, and they seem to work just fine. I know they're going to be making a lot of changes, especially on the feedback I've been giving them over the last 6 weeks before the next public release. But I would imagine the requirements seem fairly low. I mean, you're just basically taking a trace file, parsing it, and shooting it out. So it shouldn't require a whole lot of resources. I would say VMs should be fine, a couple of gigs of RAM, and everything should be happy. Is there a question over here? The question was, is there a new profiler template for the distributed replay? No, just use the standard replay template. Yeah, just the same one you would normally use in profiler. Mm-hmm. So the question was, when it creates the intermediate file, what kind of file is that? That's just an internal binary file. You can't do anything with it. It takes your traditional trace file and turns it into whatever format the replay process is expecting. So I'm not sure what it actually does. I didn't look at the file. It's got some funky file extension, so I'm not really sure what it is. So when you go to configure this, there's 4 configuration files that you can look at depending on which machine you're looking at in the environment. The first one is called dreplayserver.xml. So this is actually the config file for the controller. It's only got a couple of settings in it. Basically, just it's a couple of timing settings. The dreplay client.xml is the client configuration file, and it just specifies logging level, basically, and what replay controller it should be trying to communicate with. The actual application that you run when you do all this is dreplay.exe. Microsoft's very creative naming structure. There's 2 config files for that, dreplay.exe.preprocess.config and .replay.config. The preprocess.config is for configuring preprocessing. The replay.config is for configuring the actual replay itself. And I can fire those up in the demo. So this is the process that's going on. This is kind of my version of what was documented in books online. So there's 5 different settings you can set when you're running the actual replay itself. This is set through the config file. The connect time, the think time, the max idle time, the health mon interval, and the query timeout. So the connect time is the amount of time that the replay process should wait between connection and actually starting to do something, which is shown kind of up at the top there with where it says connect time. The think time is that would be how long the user would be thinking while doing something. So we can tell it, it takes the user on average 10 seconds to do whatever thing we're doing here within the UI on average. And that's how long it'll wait between finishing one transaction and starting the next one. So we're specifying those values in there. The max idle time is the amount of time that it's going to spend idling between doing anything. It kind of goes along with think time to make sure it's not going to wait forever. The max idle time is also there so that if there's like a 3-hour break in your workload as you're running your replay, it's not going to wait 3 hours. So you can set a max idle time of like 2 minutes and a think time of like 10 seconds. And so as things are happening, your think time is going to be 10 seconds. So 10 seconds between transactions. And then when you get to this large 3-hour break, it's just going to roll that up into that 20 or 30 second or 2-minute window, whatever you've set. So if you've got a 5-hour replay with 2 hours worth of workload, an hour at each end, you don't have to wait 5 hours for the whole thing to happen. You've got the health mon interval, and this is a setting that tells it how long to wait to resolve deadlocks, if there's any deadlocks that are caused while running the replay. And the last one is the query timeout. So this is just going to tell the SQL Server, going to tell distributed replay how long to wait to kill a query if it runs longer than X number of seconds. So I think 30 or 60 is the default. And if your queries in your OLTP app are running longer than that, you've probably got other issues you need to worry about on top of that. So I'm going to go ahead and flip over here. Wrong VM. So the first thing I need to do in my VM here is flip over to the actual directory that the distributed replay is in. So these are 64-bit machines. Distributed replay is currently a 32-bit application. So you'll need to flip over to program files x86, Microsoft SQL Server distributed replay utility, dreplay admin. Now you do have to install this separately from the normal SQL Server tools. And currently, it does require having the SQL Server tools installed or some form of Visual Studio installed for you to install any of the distributed replay components. If you don't have Management Studio installed, you're going to get error messages when installing distributed replay. That will hopefully be fixed before the next CTP comes out. So the preprocess command, throw it here so you can actually read it. Is that actually semi-readable? Because unfortunately, Zoom, it doesn't work. So I run dreplay.exe. I tell it I'm going to preprocess. I throw the -m flag at it, and I give it the name of the replay controller. So the -m is just the replay controller. I give it -i, which is the input file, and I give it the path to my trace. So again, this is a local path on the controller itself. So if I was running this from my admin workstation or from my laptop, I would need to make sure the file existed on that location. If I wanted to use the network path, I could do that. Just got to make sure all the services for distributed replay are required to run under domain accounts. So just make sure that whatever domain account distributed replay is running as has access to whatever that network path is that you want to use. And then I give it the -d flag there is the temp file that I want to use for my intermediate file. Sorry, temp folder I want to use for my intermediate file. So if I run this, it usually runs fairly quickly. Of course, this time it'll take forever. There we go. So it does 2 passes very quickly. This is a very small trace file. I've got a large, like 300 meg trace file. It takes like 5 minutes to process. It's not too bad. So you can see here I've got 772 replayable events in my trace file, and it took 2 seconds, according to them, to run. So if I go look in ctemp, oops, I want to keep that where it is. So these are the files that it actually creates. The replay data itself is actually stored in this replayevents.irf, which I suppose stands for intermediate replay file. So if I grab this command, this is the command that's actually going to run. Let me clear the screen here, make it easier to read. This is what's actually going to do the work for you. So you can obviously batch file or PowerShell to launch all this and make your life a little easier. So this is relatively the same command. You'll notice here I've got dreplay.exe. We're telling it now instead of doing preprocess when it wanted to do the replay itself. Again, we give it the controller. This time I didn't bother to use DNS names. -s is our destination server that we're going to run the replay against. So in this case, we're running it against the SQL server called Denali-1. The -w flag is going to tell the replay process what clients to use. You can use multiple clients by just doing a comma-separated list. I wasn't able to get multiple clients to work, unfortunately. There's some bug that I couldn't find in the system. The -f flag is going to tell the command line process here how often I want it to refresh and requery the distributed controller and give me updated statistics on what's going on. And then I need to give it the -d flag, which is going to tell it where it's going to go get the intermediate file from. So we fire this up, and it should start. And while it's doing that, I'm going to grab this as well and run it in another window. Oops, I need to switch folders.
Do you know if there
The question was, do I know if it's going to be command line in the RTM as well? And I do not know. I would expect it to be, but I don't know for sure. Sorry, I couldn't even get the next thing up before this thing finished. So this finished fairly quickly. So you can see here, let me scroll up here. So we dispatched the events to our client. In this case, it just took all the commands and sent it to one client. If I run the bigger file, it breaks it up into chunks of about 5,000 or 10,000 commands based on the size of the command as it distributes them. So no matter how many commands you have to replay, it's going to try to evenly distribute them across the replay clients. So the more commands you've got, you want more clients, it'll distribute it out much faster. And then once it's done with the distribution, we then start replaying the actual commands themselves. And you see here where we're actually replaying the commands. And then this is just the name of the machine of the client that's actually doing the replaying. Now, one thing to keep in mind, when you set the name of the machines that you're going to be using as your clients, you cannot use the long Windows name or the FQDN, the fully qualified domain name. You have to actually use the short 15-character NetBIOS name. This machine is called replay-controller, which is actually 2 characters too long. So you'll notice here it actually says replay-control, because that's the short, basically kind of the legacy Wins name. For some reason, it requires using that shorter name. So you need to keep the eye on that if you have longer computer names in your environment. So if you're running this distributed replay process against a remote machine and you close your machine and just let it run, because you don't need to keep that admin window open once you launch the command. It's really going to do all that in the background. You can launch it on one machine, maybe you want to monitor it when you get home from another. You can actually use the status command, which is the third option that you can run against dreplay.exe, and actually get a status back from the controller. So you can see here, I'm telling it just to refresh every 2 seconds here, and it just tells me right now just a list of all the clients and that the controller's in a ready state. So if I were to rerun the replay a second time, it'll basically give me the exact same output in my other machine. So if I was at home now, I could launch this command window on my home laptop when I'm home, and I could see what exactly is going on with my replay and kind of keep an eye on it at night while I'm watching CSI, as opposed to sitting at the office watching it or trying to RDP into my workstation or whatnot, which may or may not be allowed. And then once it's done, it's just going to kick back to this ready state. If you've got multiple clients that have checked in with the controller, those are all going to show up here as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the startup process. When you're starting up all these replay machines, the controller has to start first. So what I did on my machine here, if I look at the services themselves, kill this stuff. So the services are down here under SQL Server Distributed Replay. We got the client and the controller service. And you'll notice here that I've got the client set for a delayed start, but the start type is still automatic. The reason for that is I need to make sure, and I could have done this through dependencies as well, but I need to make sure that the controller starts first. Otherwise, the clients won't be able to properly check in. So if you've got a bunch of virtual machines that you're using for all these, you need to make sure that the controller boots first and then boot up all your client machines if you go to reboot for patching or anything like that. Hopefully that'll be fixed and they'll be able to check in later or check it automatically on reboot. So I think that's all I had to talk about. Yeah. So the next thing is contained databases. So contained databases are going to solve, hopefully, a lot of problems. Has anybody ever created a database, created a login, and then tried to move that database from one server to another and had a heck of a time actually making it all function? Contained databases, I see heads nodding. You guys must be tired or something. Contained databases are going to try and fix that for us. What we're going to do with the contained databases is actually put things like logins and SQL agent jobs within the database itself, as opposed to having those at an instance level. This will fix a lot of these problems. So there's a couple of different modes a database can run in. None, partially contained, and fully contained. As of CTP1, partially contained and none are your only options. So when you think about contained databases, a database with a containment level of none is a traditional SQL Server database. That's what we've had up until now. By default, all new databases in SQL Server Denali are going to have a containment option of none. It's in the UI properties, which I'll show you in a minute, where you just change the dropdown from none to partial or eventually full. Within the contained databases, there's two containment models. There's an application model and a management model. Basically, there's kind of what's in it. Sorry for the eye chart. So the application model is just everything within the actual application context itself. Tables, object creation, rights on objects, your typical ANSI statements, all the built-in functions, DBCC statements, stuff like that. Your management model is the higher level stuff. That's the stuff you're not going to be able to do within a fully contained database for the most part. And that's going to be server-wide compatibility views, file streams, CDC, stuff like, anything that's got to go outside. If you reference link servers, you're not going to be able to be a fully contained database at all either, because that's in the management model itself. Yes?
I'm going to assume that the SQL login is not Active Directory.
So the question was SQL logins only, or will Windows logins also be supported under contained databases? And they are actually both supported. Yes. They didn't screw that one up. They got that. They did that one very, very well. Something to keep in mind. Give me one sec. Something to keep in mind if you're planning on using change data capture or the other data capture stuff or auditing and stuff like that. Change tracking. Thank you. I'm like, it's change something. Change tracking. Those are not going to be supported under contained databases in SQL Server Denali. The plan is for those not to be supported right now. There's a lot of stuff that they need to make work to make all that stuff happen, and can't happen in a contained database because those things can write outside of the local database. So, question here first. So the question was, if you upgrade a database from an older version into Denali, can you then flip it into a contained database? And the answer is yes, you can. You just need to make sure that all your code fits the requirements and all your objects fit the requirements. And then, yeah, you can flip that flag into either partial or full, depending on where you need to go. The question, does it affect the compatibility level? I do not believe so, but don't quote me on that, because I forgot to test that. So the question was, if you log ship a contained database, does the security go with it? I don't believe you can do log shipping on a contained database, at least not using the native functionality. If you do if you roll your own, then yeah, it'll work fine, because all the data comes across, everything comes across. Always on? Always on would. Yeah, always on is database mirroring. That's all. There's a session, I think, tomorrow on always on. I tried to talk about it, but they wouldn't let me. I love always on. Oh, yeah.
The flip side of this question, can you take a contained database and make it not contained?
Yes. The question was, can you take a contained database and make it not contained? And the answer is yes. You just change it back from partial or full back to none. Yes. The question was, is Denali going to have it where databases have their own TempDB? I believe that's coming in full containment, so in a later rev. What we have currently is only partially contained, and no, that does not. It still uses the big TempDB. I believe so. I'm not 100% positive. Half of what I know of contained databases I'm not allowed to talk about because it's still under NDA, so I want to say I think so. Which is where we get into temp tables. So in a fully contained database, you're not really going to be able to use local temp tables because those would be objects out to another location. I think there's going to be a way to deal with that. It's all kind of murky and not really talked about yet. So if you put a temp table into a stored procedure, create a temp table, use it, drop it, it's going to raise a condition within the sys.dm db uncontained entities DMV. So as soon as you create the object, it should show up in that DMV. This DMV is going to tell you any objects within your database that do not fit the containment model that you're trying to use. So, excuse me, if you're in none, it shouldn't show anything up there. Yeah.
So if you're in PowerShell, SQL ID, does that potentially mean you could have the same
So the question was, if you're in a contained database, if you're using contained databases, you have two databases on the same server, could you have two SQL logins on that same instance now with different passwords? The answer is yes. I think I've got a security slide later that talks about some of the nightmares that can go along with the security. Yeah, that's the next slide. So when you're creating these, temp tables cannot use named constraints, because those constraints would have to be objects in the TempDB database currently. And temp tables cannot use user-defined data types, XML schema collections, or user-defined functions when you're creating their properties. So keep those in mind as you're working on flipping databases into contained database mode. So the security aspect. So yes, as we just talked about, you can have multiple logins with the same user ID and now different passwords. So that is a whole new nightmare. So creating a new login. So to create a login in a contained database, I don't need instance level permissions to do this, because this is now a database object. So anybody that's DBO or DB security admin can now create a login which has access to your instance. So if you and I work at the same company, I'm SA, we've got a contained database, and you're DBO, you can now create logins into my database that I have no idea about, or into my instance that I have no idea about. So be very careful about who you give DBO and DB security admin to, because that can create a whole lot of nightmare there as far as the permissions go. Access to other databases would be allowed via the guest user in those in those other databases. So if you've got guest enabled in your other user databases, users will be able to see each other's databases at that point, and any access can be granted through public role or through the guest login that way. If you've got a contained database and you're using a SQL login, there is no way to set that login to follow domain security policies. Like, with a traditional SQL login, SQL 2005 and up, you can specify, follow policies, follow password expiration. Those options do not apply in a contained database because we're dealing solely at the database level. This contained database could be taken to a non-domain machine, and we don't want to have conflicting policies there. If you have a contained database and you are a fan of using auto-close because you're, say, in a hosted environment, you work at Rackspace or you work at GoDaddy or something like that, using auto-close on contained databases on high transaction load systems that have lots of logins and logouts could lead to a DDoS attack and shutdown of your SQL service. The reason for this is every time a user logs into the system, every contained database must be started to see if that user is trying to log into that database. So if you've got lots of databases that are set to auto-close, when a user logs in, you could be spinning up 40 databases to see if that user's got rights into those databases and then reclosing them once the user doesn't have rights to them. So that's a lot of load and could lead to a very big performance problem on your server. So just another reason to not use auto-close. Yeah?
So once contained, are you restricted from granting any server level permissions?
Once contained, are you restricted from granting server level, like for the contained login?
SQL ID in a contained database,
Mm-hmm.
you can't grant it sysadmin.
So the question is, if you have a contained database login, can you grant it a fixed server role? The answer is no, because it's not a login to the instance, it's a login to the contained database. And don't even try containing master. Yeah.
How does the permissions work for the synonyms?
For the what?
Synonyms.
How do permissions work for synonyms?
Using a table from another database.
They wouldn't, because you wouldn't be able to reference an outside object in a contained database. So I don't believe synonyms are actually supported in contained databases. If they are, they'll be supported only within the confines of that local database. To do a cross-database query, you'd have to have the same login and password created in both contained databases. So there's no cross-database chaining or anything with contained databases. Pretty much, yeah. I'm assuming that's where this came from, is Azure. There's a question over here, yeah.
If you have a contained database, you flip the switch to make it a non-contained.
Mm-hmm.
Can you also run the fixed users to get those users into that database instance?
The question was, if you've got a contained database and you flip it to not contained, can you then use fixed users to sync the logins and the users back up? I would think so, but I'm not sure. I can test that later and get an answer to you. Just shoot me an email. I'll get you my email address. There's a question up here somewhere. Yeah. Blue shirt and then further back. Can you have a what? Oh, a SQL instance user and grant them access to a contained database? I believe, so the question was, if you have an instance level user, can you grant them access into a contained database? I believe so, but I'm not sure. I think you can do that mapping and it should work okay. Because, well, no, I know it does, because I can log in as SA and still access the database. So yes, you can. There's still that mapping that goes back. It would be preferred to create local logins so that they transfer correctly. In the back there? Can you switch a replicated database to contained? I don't believe contained databases support replication because some of the objects would reference outside objects. So partially contained databases. So a partially contained database is going to allow you to use some contained features and some uncontained features. Hence the name partially contained. So some of the things you can do safely is when you create a table, you can use an uncontained function, basically a function that references something in master or something like that. Check constraints, again, that use uncontained functions. If anybody's using numbered store procedures, does anybody actually use these? We call execute, your proc, semicolon, and then some number. I don't think I've ever seen anybody actually using these. I like the concept. I've never seen anybody use it. So if you're using those, you can do that in an uncontained database, which I think is weird because that's been deprecated. Again, you can check sys.dmdb uncontained entities for any uncompatible objects that have been created within your system. So in addition to that system DMV, you can also look at the databases.uncontained entity uses perfmon counter. That's going to tell you how many objects there are in each specific database that are uncontained. And that's a real-time counter, so as new objects are created, that'll go up and down. Or there's an X event, if you're a big fan of X events, that you can capture called SQL Server.database uncontained usage. If you can capture that X event, and every time an object is created, it'll then be logged as an X event. And I'll show you how to set that up right now in the demo. Let me switch to the right VM here. So I don't remember if I put the actual SQL scripts on this file, on this VM or not. Let me see. No. Oh, yeah, I did. There's the X event stuff. No, that's not it. Let me grab the file. Come on, scroll down. See, this is what happens when your computer crashes. You don't get all the stuff you need. There we go. Okay. Hang on, lose the function here. So the first thing you'll need to do to use contained databases is actually turn on the contained databases feature using spconfigure. It is an advanced option, so you'll need to turn on show advanced, flip contained database authentication to 1, and then to turn off show advanced again. So we'll do that. So at this point, I can create a new database. So obviously nothing fancy in that create database script, literally just create database. I'm just calling it CDB. And then in this case, I'm just going to use the T-SQL to change the containment from from none to partial. And if I look at the properties, not of AdventureWorks, because you cannot contain the AdventureWorks database. So I bring this up in options. You'll see there's a new option here called containment type. And we can either set that to none or partial. Once the thing releases and goes RTM, or maybe if we're lucky, even the next CTP, we'll have the third option in there, a full containment. So we'll go ahead and just change the database to contained. And object creation within the database is just like it is in any other database. We can create whatever objects we need so long as they fit the requirements of the containment type that we've set. So one thing we're going to do here is we're going to create a user. So this is not something you'd be able to do in a normal database. So you'll notice right now we're in the CDB database. And So I'm now going to create a user. So when you would normally create a user, obviously usually be based on a login. So, but in this case, instead of doing create user, my app user, or whatever I called it, from login or from with no login or something like that, we're actually going to specify a password for it. So we just do create user, my application user, with password, and we set the password for it. So we've now created a login, or sorry, a user within the contained database that has a password and does not map to a regular user. So if I try to log in, I can now SQL login, my application, what did I call it? My application user? Scrolled up. SQL, I thought I had saved it. My application user, password. Now, when you're dealing with contained databases, you can't just log into the server, because this login does not have access to master. If I try to log in, by default, I'm going to the master database. So I actually have to go to the connection properties and change the login to CDB, so that I know what database I'm connecting to. So in your application, if you just have a regular .NET app, it's going to be logging into the database. You just set that at the connection string. There's a default database parameter you can put in the connection string. Now, if I've done this right, I should be able to connect. So there we go. So I can now connect to the database. I can see no system objects. I can see no management objects, because none of those exist within my database. I can only see my actual database. I can see master and tempdb, because those have guest permissions granted to them. You'll notice MSDB is not up there, because it does not have guest permissions anymore. I haven't hacked any of my permissions to make things disappear. So, and because I don't have rights to that table, I obviously can't see any objects. So if I look at on the side, the login that does have rights, I can see my application user right here. If I pull up the properties for it, it for some reason defaults to that screen now. And if I go to the general tab, this is where I'll see an actual password has been created for this account. So if you're looking at the UI, this is the easiest way to see what's going on. Now, if we look at the sys.database principles, I thought I had this query already written. Yeah, there it is. We can see here's the application user I created. It's just simply listed as a SQL user. And we scroll over here, we'll see some additional columns which didn't used to exist in SQL 2008 and below. So my authentication type here is 2, which means it's a database login. And if I've set a default language and default IDs or language ID for this user, they would be specified here. In this case, I'm using null, which is just whatever the system default is. So you can see here, DBO is actually set as a contained user for type 3. So you can either do Windows or the local logins. Now, the cooler part of the demo, because that was all pretty boring so far, is doing an event, capturing through X events when an object is created. So this is the X events code. Now, you'll notice here I've got a GUID that listed there on my add event. Don't bother trying to write that down. You can just grab this off my blog or off the TechEd website. You have to specify the GUID, because if you look at X events, there's actually 2 SQL Server parent objects. And it defaults to the other one. And we need to grab stuff from this X event parent object. So we do create event session on server, add event, we specify the event ID. We're just going to grab the SQL Server text and the collect system time. So the text is going to be the create object command. So we know what object we're dealing with and all the stuff that, hopefully from there we can see why it's not working correctly or why it's uncontained, and just what time it captured. And then we're just going to store it out to a file in the system. So the X event is now started, and I should have some old data in there we can just look at real fast. So I just query it using just querying from the function from it through the read file target. So if we fire it up here, so this is the command that was captured, because this is an uncontained command that I ran in the contained database. In this case, I was dropping the event, or dropping the X events collection. So any object that you then create will show up in this X events, in the X events capture here. So just to show, let's go ahead and create a stored proc. We're going to just reference a temp table, throw some data into it, and should be good to go. So create the proc gets used, users are happily on the system. So if we query from that contained, the DMV that shows what our uncontained objects are, we'll see that we've got our object or column, and we've got our major ID. So in this case, the major ID is equal to the object ID. So that's how we know what object we're dealing with. And then you'll notice down there, class 19 route. So that is the default route that Service Broker creates. So if you're using Service Broker in a contained database, you're actually going to need to remove that default route and put other routing rules in place to make Service Broker work correctly. Because Service Broker is by default an uncontained, or by definition, is an uncontained set of objects, because it's designed to move stuff from one database to another. So if you're using Service Broker from one database to another, you can't be in a contained environment. Or you need to modify, and if you're using it within just itself, you'll need to modify that default route so that you can still maintain containability as the thing is working. Now, the nice thing about this contained database is, so we're going to migrate our system. So we've got our CDB, our contained database here that we want to migrate now from one system to another. So we can back it up. And we've got our lovely backup file here of our nice large database. And if I switch over to my other VM, which I thought I had logged into, here, try doing this the faster way. Damn it, come here. There we go. New folder. Backup. Backup. Come on. Backup. There we go. Paste that in. Connect to our second server using Windows authentication. So no databases, no magic. Restore database CDB from disk. I hate typing. Backup. I really hate typing. Backup /cdb.back. Never type in a demo, and this is why. Okay, database is restored. Nothing magical I need to do to get it back in there. So if I go back and I try to connect with that account, which I don't have here anymore. Get the password, because I don't remember what it is. Okay, there we go. Connect, SQL, paste. Should be able to log right into the server and see our contained database. So migration between one server to another, incredibly simple now. I don't have to go fixing logins. I don't have to move stuff around. It just magically connects and works, which is very, very nice and very, very easy, unlike the old way of doing it, which was an absolute nightmare. So at this point, all I need to do is change my connection strings, and my application should be back up and running, and everything should be happy, and my users should be happy. For full containment, I believe agent jobs are going to be included. They're not yet, so I can't show it to you, because this is CTP1. So we got any? Oh, yeah, question.
No restriction on file size or volumes or anything like that?
No restraints. The question was any constraints on file group size or file group numbers or anything like that? No. It's all the standard defaults, or all the standard limits. So 30,000 files, multiple terabytes or petabytes of data. You'll be fine. Any developers in the house? Few. Okay. So you guys probably use identity when creating tables, managing IDs. Yeah. To an invalid? What do you mean?
Could you change the compatibility to 9.0?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sure, we'll experiment. You guys got 2 seconds? That's not an account that's got admin rights. Oh, no, that is an account with admin rights. Properties. We'll go 8.0. How's that? All right, apparently it works. So you can use lower level compatibility modes with contained databases. So you could take a 2000 database, move it into a contained database, and keep it running. Sure. Create new logins, make it contained, create logins, and you should be fine. As long as you're not using any of the things you can't use, the non-contained functions and stuff like that. So for the developers out there, so when you're creating tables, obviously identity, big deal, makes life nice and simple for creating primary keys and whatnot. Identity's got some issues, to put it mildly. It's slow, you can't reset it easily, and it's not ANSI compliant. Fortunately, we now have sequences. I know as an MVP, we've been complaining about not having these for years, and now we have them finally. So this is going to give you an ANSI compliant sequence number generator. So your code that runs on Oracle that uses sequences will now run on SQL Server. I mean, all the PL stuff won't work, but the sequence part will work at least. We have a create sequence command, and we have an alter sequence command. So this is going to be much, much faster than identity because of the way that it works under the hood. You can use it sort of like identity by specifying next value as a default constraint in a table. So instead of just hitting yes, you just put a default value in. And I've got code that shows how to do it. Just use constraint, something or other, .next value. And if you want to call it separately from a default constraint, you can just call the sequence, grab the next value out of it, and do whatever you need to do. So if you have 5 tables and you want the same identity value, the same sequence of numbers to be used across those tables, then you can just use this as part of your T-SQL code, or even just as the default constraint still. Just put the same reference the same constraint in all your table definitions, and you'll get one sequence number managing all those tables. So you can set a sequence to recycle automatically. So as the sequence so when you hit the upper bounds of the sequence, you can just tell it to go right back to the beginning and start over again, if you want. If you're using it for a default value for a primary key for a table, you probably won't want to do that because you will get duplicate values as your primary key in your table. That'll make things not very happy. You can specify the number of values which are cached. This is one of the really nice things about sequences. With an identity value, the way it works under the covers is when you spin up the identity, when SQL Server starts, it allocates 20 values into memory, whatever the next 20 values you're going to use are, and it stores those in memory. Every time one of those values is used, it then goes and updates a system table that says this value has now been used. Sequences don't do that. They will, by default, cache 50 numbers, and when it caches those 50 numbers, it's going to write to the system table whatever the highest number of those 50 was used. So say it allocates 1 to 50. It's going to say, I've used up to 50. Don't ever reissue up to 50 again. So then the next time it allocates, it's going to allocate 51 to 100. It then, at that allocation, goes, all right, I've used 100. So much less writes that are having to happen within your system. So when you're creating this, you're going to use your min value and max value to specify your lower and upper bounds. I've got sample code in a second here that'll show how this all works. So when the sequence loads, so I kind of talked about that first bullet point already. It's going to grab the user-defined range. So 50 is the default. You can specify higher or lower than that. If you go too low, you're going to start getting into performance issues, and it'll perform like identity. If you get higher, if you go with too big a range, though, you're eventually going to run out of numbers. Because what's going to happen is that every time you restart SQL, you're going to lose values. So say I've allocated 1 to 50, and I've inserted 5 rows into my table. So 1 through 5 are used. So, and that'll restart my system. The next time the system comes up, the next row that's going to go in is actually going to have a sequence number of 51. Because it doesn't go back and grab those old numbers. It knows that that block was allocated, and as far as it knows, it was used. So to the next restart, we grab the next number, which will be 51 at that point. So numbers will be skipped. So those DBAs or those developers out there that like seeing order IDs with no skips, they're just going to have to get over it. Yes, suck it up. It's worth it for the benefits that come from sequences to deal with missing a few numbers here and there. Good luck explaining that to your accountants and your bean counters. I'd be more than happy to come in as a consultant and tell them you're right, if anybody wants that. You can reseed the sequence relatively easily. There's a reseed command, which I'll show, I think is in the demo, in the script I've got. And yeah, we covered the rest of that already. So here's the code to create a sequence. You can specify whatever data type you want, tiny int, small int, integer, or big int. I believe the numeric data types are supported as well. So you've got start with 0, increment by 1. I've got a max value of 2 million, and I'm caching 1,000 at a time. So I can also set, now I said earlier you can set min value as well. So min value is going to work with start with. So if I set min value higher than start with, I'm actually going to start at the minimum value. If I specify a minimum value lower than start with, those numbers are going to be as considered part of the sequence, but I'm still going to start at whatever my start with value was. So if I put min value of -500, if I reset the sequence back to the beginning, or if I allow it for auto rollover, it's going to roll over back to -500 and work its way up, even though this time I'm starting at 0. So you've got those two values to keep in mind in there. And when you're using this guy, here's the syntax. So if you're using it as part of a default value, you just do next value for dbo.mySequence based on the sequence we just created. If you just want to grab the value out and use it within a T-SQL statement, within a stored proc or a function, you can use that middle block of code there, just declare value, set value equal to next value for dbo.mySequence. And if you want to just get a list from a sequence, you can just use it like there, just as part of an object. Select next value for dbo.mySequence, comma, whatever, from, and in my case, sys.alltables. Yes, Stu?
If you have multiple sessions hitting at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and you're grabbing next value, it's grabbing the committed. In other words, like if you have two sessions open up in Management Studio, and you do select value for next value for MySQL, and you run the exact same command under a different session, is it going to return the same value for next value?
So the question was, if I've got two sessions open and I run next value in each, am I going to get the same number or am I going to get different numbers? You're going to get different numbers. In memory, it's keeping track of what's been used. What persists down to the disk is simply the last number of the sequence that was allocated. So in memory, it's all done next value as you'd expect.
How does it work on the batch actions? When the batch actions get rolled back,
The question was, how does it work with rollbacks? Is a number returned back on rollback? No. Once a number's used, it's used. Because again, there's just a counter in memory at that point. So the writes to the system table, well, those will be committed no matter what, because those aren't part of your actual transaction.
the number once generated is generated.
Yeah, once a number's been issued, it's done, unless you've got some sort of restart sequence. No, there's no scope identity issues or anything like that. So if you need to grant rights to a user to be able to hit a sequence directly, you just grant update on the sequence. So that'll let them actually use the sequence itself. So user-defined server roles. We all know fixed server roles. They've been around since God only knows when. User-defined server roles are going to be very, very handy in today's environment where you have to have separation of duties. We can now create a sysadmin-like role that can only do certain things. We can do, we've obviously got backup admin already, but right now, like to restore, you have to basically be sysadmin. So we can now create a fixed server, or a user-defined server role that could restore databases to a production server, to give some other person the rights to do that without them having the sysadmin level permissions. This is going to be great for your junior level admins that you need them to be able to do specific sets of tasks that require higher level permissions without granting them everything. Bosses that seem to think they need rights into the database that really don't. This would be great for them. You like that one? This guy's laughing his head off over here. Auditors, developers, et cetera, that think they need sysadmin level access just to do that one little thing, because that's their excuse for needing sysadmin rights. We can now stop that. We can just give them that one little right at the server level without having to actually give them access to everything. And you can actually also create a trigger, a server-side trigger, or a server trigger to monitor when logins are added and removed from these fixed server roles, so that you can keep track of who's been added and who's been removed and when. so that you've got some sort of some auditing in place to go with giving your auditors access to the system. So in the UI, it's pretty basic. You right-click and you go New Fixed Server Role, or New User-Defined Server Role. And then you've got a large list rather, of objects that you can grant rights to. In this case, I just said alter any availability group was the option that I selected here. So I just check grant, give it a name, click OK, and this person, whoever I put in this role, can now alter any availability group within the server without having rights really to do much else within the instance itself. So they can manage part of the system without actually seeing user data, because they're not going to be mapped to DBO by default anymore, because they're not sysadmin. So if you want to do it through T-SQL, if you're not a UI guy, some fairly basic T-SQL here. Create server role, give it a name, authorization of SA, just who's creating it. Alter the server role, add a member, in this case my user. This is from books online, for the most part, if you can't recognize the horrible naming convention. And then you just grant rights to it. Grant alter any availability group to the always-on admin group. Grant alter any endpoint. Grant create availability, create availability group, and grant create endpoint. So at this point, this user can manage my always-on configuration. So if my cluster admin insists on being sysadmin on my always-on servers, I knew we'd get always-on into this talk somehow. Because it uses clustering, so they want to be able to see everything. Cool, no problem. Let me just create you a very limited set of permissions here, and you can see it and manage it, and you can do it. You can fail stuff over if you think you need to, but you don't get to manage my SQL Server. You don't get to create databases. You don't get to drop objects, stuff like that, because he can't. All he could do, at this point, he can't even delete an availability group out of the system, because he just simply does not have that right to. So if you want to capture those server role changes, that's going to be done through a trigger. So just do a create trigger on all server. We want to capture for the add server role member and drop server role member objects. And in this case, I'm just going to trigger an X event data, or I'm going to return X event data back to the screen just to show what's going on. You could obviously capture that however you saw fit. Let me close some of these sessions here. So security, server roles. So see we have a new object or new little graphic here for our fixed server role. So if we do a new server role, the UI will eventually open. We get one of the lovely Microsoft default names that includes the date and time now for some reason. And we get a huge number of things we can administrate here that we can grant rights to. And you'll notice here, if I had like availability groups set up, or if I had other server roles set up, I could grant additional rights to those very specifically. So if I had a junior DBA who was responsible for managing some specific always-on configuration, or some specific always-on availability group, so okay, you can manage just that availability group. I don't have to give them rights to all of them. So it's very granular as to what sort of rights I need to actually give and what I need to take care of here. So so I can say, okay, so you need the ability to change passwords. So I'll just give you the alter login permission. You can change passwords and you can manage a couple of things, and that's all you can do. You can't do anything other than that. So it's very, very specific what you can do. Membership is easy to manage. It's listed right here. Yeah.
Is there a role that you can grant to developers so they can not only create stored procedures but alter them also?
The question was, is there a right you can grant that will let users create and alter stored procedures?
Well, you can do a create. There's a role that you can grant to let them create stored procedures.
Mm-hmm.
But then unless they get it right the first time, they can't alter it.
Yeah, there should be an alter any procedure role that you can grant within the database. I think so. I think it's in there. So hit me up afterwards. We'll double check. Yeah. So the question was, is there a backup and restore option? There should be a restore. I think it's just create database is what you have to give them. I don't think there's a restore one specifically. I think you can just, well, you can do backup operator. That'll let you back up, but you can't restore with backup operator because you can't create a database. So I think you just have to give them the create database permission here, and that should let you restore. I'd have to play with it to find the exact set of permissions that you need. Yeah, backup operator is fixed server role. Yeah. So data tier applications. So if you haven't heard of data tier applications, I rail on them often, called backpacks. These are actually getting an awful lot better than that abomination that they released in V1. I know I'm not supposed to bag on the Microsoft products while I'm up here, but that one deserves it. The big feature that we're getting now is in-place upgrades. So in the first version, first rev of data tier applications, when you deployed the application to the server to do an upgrade, it created a new database, recreated all your objects, transferred all your data, dropped the old database, and renamed it back in place. There were a few issues with this. Transaction log backups, mirroring, log shipping, pretty much anything else that involves backup and recovery. Mirroring didn't work, all sorts of stuff broke. Now we have in-place upgrades, so we no longer drop the data, do a create database, transfer data. It now does a schema compare, finds all the changes, and simply does alters to the objects as we would expect them to do. This does support all the current SQL Azure feature sets as of what's in Azure as of May of 2011. The next rev after this will include, the data tier applications are constantly going to be playing catch up to Azure because it's based around SQL Azure. The other really, really nice thing about the data tier applications is it does now support actually having data in the tables. So if you've got sample data within your tables that you're using your data tier application for, you can now, that data will now come across as part of your deployment process instead of having to do some sort of after deployment script to actually load your data. So that'll all be captured as part of the process. When we're actually deploying SQL Server, we've got a few options now for deployment. We can do a command line install with a bunch of switches. We can do a settings file now. And these require, doing some of these additional stuff is going to require the newer operating systems, 2008 R2, 2008 R1, SP2, XP4, and up, or Windows 2008 R2. Those are going to be the supported platforms for Denali as of this point. So if you've got older systems that you need to upgrade, you want to upgrade to Denali, you'll need to upgrade the OS first, and then get them into the right level to support this. Anybody use clustering? Big fan of HA? Keeping systems online? Yeah, Gio's up there. So if you're using a 32-bit instance on a 64-bit OS, that will not be supported anymore. Clustered installs are no longer going to be supported under WoW, so that'll be something to keep in mind as you upgrade. So if you do need a 32-bit instance and you need some sort of high availability option, you're going to need to look at Hyper-V or VMware to host that instance, because you're not going to be able to do it with clustering anymore. If any of you are doing a geographically dispersed cluster or have wanted to, and you've had networking issues because of the stretched VLANs that you have to deal with, you can now, clustering is now going to support multi-subnet failover. So you can have multiple IP addresses from multiple subnets defined as cluster resources, and it'll fail them over correctly depending on what side of the node that it's going to be on. This is kind of a nice one. Mount points can now be mounted against local disks instead of SAN LUNs. So you don't need to have a 5 gig LUN just sitting there as your root disk, and then you build mount points off of that. You can use your local disks. Yeah.
64-bit, if WoW can be supported, it takes less than run in 32-bit, like the browser going to be upgraded to 64-bit?
The question was, is things like the browser going to be upgraded to 64-bit? That I would assume is the case. I don't know. I'm not running the browser on any of my machines because I'm default instance. I would assume all the components will be upgraded, at least all the clusterable components will be upgraded to 64-bit. So things like reporting services may still run in 32-bit mode because that doesn't actually require a 64-bit OS or clustering. If you do use the mount points off your local disks, do keep in mind that only one instance can use each local disk at a time, so you still need to set your dependencies correctly. So you've still got issues there. 22 seconds left. Awesome. So some related sessions here. There's a couple of the breakout sessions. I'm talking about some of the stuff that I've covered in the session today. I know I covered a bunch of different topics. Interactive sessions, some hands-on labs downstairs, a bunch of demo stations. If you want to find me, I will be down at the SQL Server booth in about 4 minutes so I don't get yelled at. Tech Ed resources, complete an eval online on the demo stations on the stations outside. You get all sorts of cool stuff. I have no idea what that thing in the middle is. There is the, if you want to do the eval right now, grab the bug and hit the eval side. I'll throw that back up in a minute. And that's everything I got. Thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of Tech Ed.